All right, deep divers, you ready to go deep? We're talking about rebellion, but not just any rebellion. We're going way back, before humans, before Earth even. Angelic rebellion, heaven before the fall.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating, the sources you sent me on this. Wild stuff. We're talking about the very nature of rebellion, like what makes an angel go bad.
And we're starting with the ultimate bad boy, right? Lucifer. Everyone thinks they know him, fallen angel, cast out of heaven, but it all starts so differently.
Oh yeah, he wasn't always the angel of darkness. We're talking top-tier angel here.
Right.
The sources paint him as this incredible being, beautiful, wise, powerful, like the ideal angel.
Right, like if you had to design an angel from scratch, it's Lucifer.
Oh.
So how does that go so wrong? What happened?
Well, that's the thing about perfection, isn't it? It can be a heavy crown to wear. The texts you sent suggest that being surrounded by that divine light, that constant reminder of God's power, it started to wear on him.
You mean instead of feeling awe, he felt pressure, like it messed with his head?
In a way, yeah. See, angels were created by God. Their purpose, their very being, was defined by him. Some sources suggest that Lucifer started to question that. Like, why is only one being allowed to dictate everyone's destiny for all eternity?
Whoa, so we're not just talking about some petty power grab here, are we? This is a full-blown existential crisis.
Exactly. It's questioning the very nature of free will. Why were angels created with the capacity for independent thought if they weren't meant to use it? Why only one being gets to make the rules?
Heavy stuff. And those doubts, those questions, they didn't stay locked up in Lucifer's head, did they?
Nope, they echoed. The sources talk about other angels, even entire factions in heaven, who were sympathetic to Lucifer's point of view.
Okay, so it's starting to sound less like Bad Apple
Yeah.
and more like a full-on rebellion brewing in heaven.
Exactly. Some angels were drawn to Lucifer's promise of true free will. Others felt God's power was too absolute, too controlling. They started to see God less as a benevolent creator and more as a cosmic dictator.
Wow, okay. So we've got heaven divided, and then of course there's Jesus, right? Your sources really emphasize the contrast here.
Absolutely. Now, it's important to remember that these sources present Jesus as the embodiment of love and obedience to God. He represents complete acceptance of the divine plan, the polar opposite of Lucifer's rebellion.
Total opposite. One wants to break free, the other's all about accepting their role in the grand scheme of things. Talk about a cosmic rivalry. Did they ever, interact during this whole rebellion phase?
Unfortunately, the sources are a little vague on the specifics of their interactions, but what is clear is that Lucifer saw Jesus' very existence as a kind of living rebuke. This perfect example of obedience and devotion, it just amplified everything Lucifer was railing against.
Yeah, and you got to feel for the guy a little bit, right? I mean, not condoning a rebellion against God or anything, but talk about an impossible situation.
Right, and this is where it becomes more than just a power struggle. It's ideological. It's a clash between fundamentally different ways of seeing the universe. Lucifer championed free will and autonomy, even if it meant defying God. Jesus represented total acceptance, even celebration of the divine plan.
Okay, so let's unpack this clash a little further. What were some of the concrete ways these different beliefs manifested? What did this rebellion actually look like?
It's tough to say for sure. The sources are pretty vague about the actual events. But what we can gather is that ultimately Lucifer's doubts, his questions, his anger, it all boiled over.
And that brings us to the fall, right? This is the pivotal moment, not just in Lucifer's story, but in the entire story of everything.
Exactly. Consumed by his own ambitions, convinced of his own righteousness, Lucifer makes a choice. He directly challenges God. Now, the sources don't go into a lot of detail about what that challenge actually involved.
Did he storm into God's throne room with a legion of rebel angels? Did they have some kind of epic showdown?
Haha, I wish. Sadly, we don't get those juicy details. What we do know is that Lucifer's rebellion ultimately failed. He was cast out of heaven, banished from God's light.
Along with the angels who sided with him, right? The whole rebel crew.
Yep, the sources are pretty clear about that. Lucifer's rebellion wasn't a solo act. He had followers, angels who shared his doubts, his ambitions, his desire for something more, and they paid the price alongside him.
Wow. So from the heights of heaven to whatever came next.
Yeah.
That's one heck of a fall from grace.
Right, and that's what's so fascinating about this whole story. It makes you think, even today, about the nature of free will, the limits of obedience, the consequences of questioning authority. What compromises are we willing to make? When is it right to stand up, even against overwhelming odds?
Big questions.
All right, so we're diving into some seriously heavy stuff today.
Yeah, definitely. biblical proportions, you could say.
We're talking rebellion in heaven, a fallen angel, the whole shebang.
And how it all ties back to us down here.
Exactly. You sent over some intense texts about Lucifer, and let me tell you, this is way more intense than your average angel story.
Right. We usually hear about the fall, the aftermath, but these texts,
Paint a different picture.
yeah, they give us a glimpse of Lucifer before
Before the fall.
When
When he was still the morning star, the most radiant, most glorious being in all of heaven, until, well, he wasn't.
It's like trying to imagine a shattered masterpiece, you know?
Trying to piece together what it looked like before.
Exactly.
So what happened? This wasn't just some, minor angelic disagreement.
Oh no, this was a full-blown rebellion. And Lucifer was leading the charge.
He actually aimed to overthrow God.
That was the goal, to reshape everything, put himself in charge.
Wow. That's ambition.
And he wasn't alone. He managed to persuade a whole faction of angels to join him.
Seriously, what could he possibly have said to convince them?
That's a question for the ages, isn't it? What promises did he make? What arguments could possibly sway an angel to rebel against? Well, God.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. If a rebellion can erupt even in heaven.
It makes you wonder about the nature of free will, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, even angels have the capacity to choose
Yeah.
the wrong path.
And that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because these texts, they describe Lucifer with words like brilliance, glory, even beauty. Not exactly what you'd associate with
Hey.
evil.
Not at all. It's more like fallen greatness almost.
Exactly. And it makes his fall that much more tragic and honestly more thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Because it challenges this simplistic idea we have about good and evil. This notion that evil is always easy to spot, that it, wears a devil costume.
Like it's always obvious.
Right. But Lucifer's story, it suggests that even inherent goodness, when it's twisted by pride, ambition, a thirst for power,
It can become something dark.
it adds a whole other layer to the idea of temptation, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, was there something inherently flawed in Lucifer from the beginning?
Or was it more about the seductive nature of power itself?
Right. Like, was there a moment, a turning point where he looked around and thought, wait, I deserve that throne?
It's definitely a question worth pondering. The texts seem to suggest that Lucifer, in his brilliance, might have started seeing himself as equal to God, maybe even superior.
And that kind of thinking, that's a dangerous path, whether you're an angel or a human,
His slippery slope.
for sure. But this wasn't just some war of words, was it? The texts talk about an actual cosmic battle.
Oh, absolutely. This was the real deal. Angelic warfare on a massive scale.
With Archangel Michael leading the forces of heaven against Lucifer.
The ultimate showdown. And here's the thing. Lucifer doesn't lose because he's physically weaker. He's defeated because he's cut off from God's grace.
So it's not just about raw power.
No, it's about the source of that power. Think about it. Lucifer's strength, his brilliance, it all stems from his connection to something greater than himself, to God.
But when that connection is severed,
He's left with nothing but his own ambition and pride.
which in the end are pretty hollow without that source.
Exactly.
That's a powerful message when you really think about it. It's like a cautionary tale for us too.
Oh, absolutely. About where we place our own sources of strength, of validation, what happens when those sources are compromised.
Definitely something to reflect on. So what about the aftermath? Lucifer's cast out, defeated, he becomes Satan, right?
Right. Banished, exiled. And that's when he sets his sights on a new target.
Earth. Us.
He can't rule in heaven, so he sets out to, well,
Corrupt God's newest creation.
it's almost as if he's trying to build his own kingdom, isn't it?
Right here. Which I gotta say is a pretty terrifying thought.
Terrifying is an understatement. Imagine it. Lucifer, this incredibly intelligent, once radiant being, but now all that power, that intellect,
Twisted and directed toward tempting, deceiving humanity.
it ups the stakes considerably, don't you think?
Considerably is another understatement, especially since these texts suggest that this whole rebellion, this cosmic battle,
Just the beginning.
it's all a prelude to an even bigger conflict, the battle between Jesus and Satan.
Exactly. Understanding Lucifer's fall is like getting a glimpse into a cosmic chess game that's been playing out since the beginning of time. And the stakes, well, they couldn't be higher.
The fate of humanity hangs in the balance, the eternal struggle between good and evil.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if even the most radiant, the most glorious angel could fall.
What does that say about us?
About our own choices, our capacity for both good and evil. It's like we all have that morning star potential within us.
But also the potential for it to become something very different.
It's a sobering thought. And ultimately a reminder that this story isn't just about a battle that happened somewhere up in heaven. It's a reflection of the battles we all face every single day within ourselves.
The choices we make, the temptations we struggle with.
They shape who we become, for better or for worse. And that's something we're thinking about, isn't it?
Absolutely. Ever had that feeling, like that gut punch of betrayal? When someone you thought you knew, someone you trusted, totally turns on you.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving into today. A story where the betrayal, it cuts deep. We're talking about Jesus and how one of his own disciples sets in motion the events that lead to his death.
Wow.
It's a story, honestly, it feels as relevant today as it did thousands of years ago.
Absolutely.
So we're looking at how Satan tries to stop Jesus. But we're going to look at it kind of strategically. It's got intrigue, psychological suspense, and this battle of wills that, honestly, people have been talking about for centuries.
For sure.
Okay, so picture this. Jesus is gaining followers left and right. He's challenging the way things are. It's not like he's leading some violent revolution or anything, but his message, just him being there, it's shaking things up.
Right.
And you know who helps take him down? Judas, one of his closest guys.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Like, it's always been this puzzle why Judas would do that.
I think the thing that makes it so interesting is, well, it's too easy to just say it was greed, right? Like, put yourself in Judas's shoes for a second. You've been following someone for years, you believe he's the Messiah, and then you see him reject power, wealth. Wouldn't you start to question things? Like maybe feel disillusioned, even a little doubtful?
Absolutely. I mean, what was going through his head? And then there's that detail, the source material even mentions that Judas gave 30 pieces of silver for the betrayal.
Yeah.
That always struck me. Like, it wasn't just a spur of the moment thing, you know, it felt calculated, transactional even.
Yeah. And, that amount, it wasn't random. 30 pieces of silver, it had meaning. It really underlined how huge of a betrayal it was. But it's bigger than just Judas, right?
Right. Oh, sure.
This source material talks about a much larger game that was going on.
Right.
Like, Satan wasn't just manipulating Judas. He was also whispering to the religious leaders, preying on their insecurities, their fears. They saw Jesus as a threat to their authority, their whole system.
Totally. Like, they were pawns in this twisted game.
Exactly.
It's kind of scary how easy it is to use fear and pride against people, but it gets worse.
Worse how?
It wasn't enough to just, get rid of Jesus. This was about breaking him, crushing his spirit.
Oh, absolutely. And the source material emphasizes this. It highlights how much Satan really understood human weakness, how susceptible we are to fear, greed, pride. And he knew physical pain was just one part of it. He was targeting something deeper, to make Jesus feel completely alone, abandoned. That was the real goal.
The source material doesn't hold back either. It uses this phrase, unimaginable pain, and wow.
Intense.
The weight of it all, the betrayal, everything that was expected of him, knowing what he had to do. But what gets me is that even with all this pressure, Jesus chooses silence. He doesn't defend himself, argue back. Why do you think that is?
That silence, it speaks volumes. He saw the bigger picture. He understood this was part of something larger, a divine plan, something way beyond himself. While Satan thinks he's winning, Jesus sees it as the fulfillment of his purpose. Redemption through sacrifice.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, especially when you're surrounded by darkness.
Absolutely. It makes you think, though, how often do we face these kinds of struggles? Where we might want to just give in to despair or lash out. What if, like Jesus, we could find purpose in the middle of the chaos?
Oh, this is a good one. We're talking about the Garden of Gethsemane, right?
Right, the night before the crucifixion.
This is where the divine and human collide. It's incredibly intense.
You said it.
I mean, here we see Jesus not just facing his fate, but actually wrestling with the massive weight of what it all represents.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. We're talking about a garden, not some huge spectacle. What's it like there?
Yeah, so picture this. A quiet olive grove. It's nighttime. Maybe a sliver of moon, stars in the sky. The disciples are there, but they're wiped, they're asleep.
They have no idea what's about to go down.
Yeah, no clue. And that's the thing, right? This stark contrast between the peace of the setting and the absolute turmoil going on inside Jesus.
It's like highlights how human he is in this moment.
Totally.
So what's going through his mind here? He knows what's coming.
Oh, he knows. Betrayal, a brutal execution. It's all there on the horizon.
And to make matters even worse, Satan decides to make an appearance.
Of all times, right?
Right. Fresh off a defeat in the wilderness, he sees Jesus' vulnerability and he goes for it. But here's the thing. This time, he switches tactics. Instead of offering earthly power, he tries to plant seeds of doubt.
Interesting. So he's like, give up. Why bother?
Basically, he's preying on the very human desire to avoid pain, to choose the easier path, even if it means sacrificing something greater.
So how does Jesus respond? This is a pretty insidious move by Satan.
Right.
Yeah, and Jesus's response is so powerful. He prays. He cries out, Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. But then, the crucial turning point, yet not my will, but yours be done.
So he's not asking to, skip out on the whole thing.
No, not at all. It's way more nuanced than that. He's acknowledging the very real, very human desire to avoid suffering, but he chooses to align himself with God's will.
Talk about putting your faith on the line.
Right. And speaking of putting things on the line, this is when Judas shows up with the soldiers.
Orchestrated by Satan, of course.
Of course. And he thinks he's won. He really does. But what he doesn't get is this is just the beginning.
It's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Nope.
So, this story, it's old, but it's still so powerful. We all face our own Gethsemanes, those moments where the pressure is unbearable, where we have huge decisions to make. What can we learn from Jesus' experience, even today?
It really challenges us, doesn't it? How do we face our own moments of doubt? How do we reconcile what we want with what might be part of a much bigger plan?
Right, and what does it even mean to be strong?
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Satan thought he'd won in this garden. He was so sure of himself. What does that say about the nature of true victory?
It really makes you think.
It does, it does.
Okay, so picture this. Satan himself, right there watching the crucifixion.
Oh, wow.
And he is absolutely sure, totally convinced that he has won.
Yeah.
I mean, talk about a chilling thought, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But what if, and this is where it gets really interesting, what if that moment, which looks like a victory for him, is actually a colossal miscalculation? What if he's so blinded by his own, ego, his arrogance, that he misses the true significance of what's actually happening?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the idea that the crucifixion wasn't a defeat at all,
Right.
but a planned victory, one that Satan just couldn't comprehend.
Fascinating.
So, I mean, how could an event as brutal as the crucifixion actually be the cornerstone of Jesus' mission?
Right.
I mean, that's a big question.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to unpack today, looking at this pivotal moment from historical, theological perspective, all of it, to try to understand how it all really went down. Now, close your eyes for just a second and try to imagine yourself there, okay?
Yeah.
The dust, the noise of the crowd. I mean, they are angry.
Yeah.
Jesus is on trial, he's been condemned, and now he's carrying his cross to Golgotha. Just the weight of every step, the physical agony, the emotional torment, it's almost unbearable to even think about.
It really is. And, what's incredible is that this wasn't some kind of, unforeseen tragedy, like a random act.
Yeah.
Prophecies in the Old Testament actually pointed to this very moment, to the crucifixion. It wasn't a surprise, at least not to those who understood the scripture.
Right.
But of course, you know how it is. The meaning of those prophecies, well, that was widely debated.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's always been the case, hasn't it?
Always.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to me how easily Satan can manipulate even those closest to Jesus.
Right.
I mean, think about it. The crowds, they're caught up in all the frenzy and all the emotion, and they turn on him.
Yeah.
It's a chilling reminder that, doubt and fear, they can really take root anywhere.
Absolutely. And that brings us to one of the most discussed moments of the crucifixion, Jesus' words on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
It's a cry of anguish that has really echoed through the centuries.
It really has.
And it's prompted so much debate and interpretation, but it's so vital to understand that this wasn't a literal abandonment by God the Father.
Right. It's hard to wrap our minds around that, isn't it? I mean, what could possibly be happening in that moment?
Right. So think about it this way. Jesus, being both fully God and fully human, was experiencing the full weight of humanity's separation from God, a separation that was caused by sin. He wasn't just experiencing physical pain at that moment, he was experiencing the spiritual agony of that separation from God, something that, we can only begin to grasp intellectually.
And that feeling of being utterly alone, abandoned even by God, that's something we can relate to, though.
Absolutely.
We've all faced those dark moments when it feels like we're completely on our own.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of atonement comes in. Jesus takes on the burden of that separation, becoming the bridge between humanity and God.
And then he says those powerful words, "It is finished." And this wasn't just the end of his physical life, right? This was the fulfillment of prophecy, the completion of his mission to atone for humanity's sins, all of it.
Yes.
And now this is where Satan's miscalculation, his fatal flaw, becomes so fascinating to me. He thought this was his victory. Can you believe it?
It's almost comical, isn't it?
It really is.
Blinded by his own arrogance, consumed by a desire for power, he's totally incapable of understanding the true spiritual reality unfolding right in front of him. He just can't see that the crucifixion wasn't a defeat. It was the planned climax, the linchpin of a much larger victory.
Wow.
One orchestrated by a power far greater than his own.
It makes you wonder, right? If a being as powerful as Satan could so drastically misunderstand the situation, what else might he be getting wrong?
That's a good question.
What about us? Could our own perceptions of defeat sometimes blind us to the bigger picture? Maybe what we see as a failure is actually part of a plan that we can't yet see,
Yeah.
leading to a victory we can't even imagine.
Right.
Something to ponder. All right, so picture this, okay? The disciples, right? They're just devastated.
Yeah.
They're huddled together. They think it's over, right? Their leader is gone.
Right.
Executed. But here's the thing. What they don't see, what they can't see, is that the real battle, it's just beginning. We're talking an epic, cosmic showdown. And the stakes, oh, they couldn't be higher. We're talking about the fate of humanity here.
You know, it's interesting you think about it. You've got the visible despair of the disciples, right?
Yeah.
Set against this invisible clash that's happening in the spiritual realm. It's a powerful contrast.
Totally. And that contrast, that's what we're diving into today. We're talking about the descent into hell.
Yeah.
But, and this is key, not as a consequence of defeat. This is a deliberate choice.
Yeah, and that's what's really fascinating about this whole concept. You gotta understand, in the ancient world, death, that was it, the ultimate end, game over. So when Jesus enters hell,
Or Hades, right? Sometimes you see it translated that way.
exactly, Hades, when he enters that realm, he's not just entering an afterlife, he's going into the belly of the beast, the heart of enemy territory, the one place where death, where separation from God reigns supreme.
So not just a place where God isn't, but like a place defined by his absence.
Exactly. And, you know, there are a lot of different interpretations of what that means, theologically speaking, but that core idea, that idea of a realm completely cut off from God by spiritual darkness, that's pretty consistent.
Wow. Okay, so that just adds a whole other level to this.
Well,
right?
absolutely.
So we've got Satan, right? He thinks he's won. He's feeling pretty good about himself, I imagine. And then, bam, here comes Jesus.
Right. Talk about a shock to the system. I mean, he's expecting a defeated enemy, not a challenger showing up on his doorstep right after what he thought was his victory lap.
It's like ultimate power move.
Right.
And this is where we get that image, right? The one that always stuck with me. Jesus holding the keys of death and Hades.
Yes. And it's such a striking image, but it's so much more than just a cool visual.
Right. There's got to be more to it than that.
There is. It speaks to a much deeper theological reality, a complete shift in authority. See, those keys, they signify that Jesus, he isn't bound by death or the realm of the dead. He has dominion over them. He holds the keys, literally.
So his sacrifice, the fact that he was willing to go through death, that's what actually breaks death's power.
Exactly. It dismantles it from the inside out. And that's where this whole thing gets incredibly relevant for us today, even.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. If death is no longer the ultimate end, if it doesn't have the final say, well, that changes everything, doesn't it? It changes how we live our lives, our purpose. It means the possibility of eternal life is real.
That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It reframes everything, you know? Death, it goes from being a full stop to maybe. Well, maybe an ellipsis. It's not the end of the story.
I'm struck by the reversal. You know, Satan, he thinks he's using death as this ultimate weapon.
Yeah, his trump card.
But in reality, death, it becomes the thing that undoes him. Wild.
It's a total paradox. It really highlights the unexpected nature of how this victory plays out. Hope, it triumphs over despair. Life conquers death.
Powerful stuff. So here's something to think about, okay? What if this unseen battle, this cosmic showdown, what if it really did tip the scales once and for all? What if we look for them, the subtle echoes of that victory, playing out in our own lives, even in the middle of our everyday struggles, even when things are tough, even when we experience setbacks? What if that victory is still echoing even now? You know, it's wild when you think about it, right? Like from ancient myths to those like big blockbuster action movies, we're kind of obsessed with death. But what if death, like, wasn't the end? What if it was like the start of something totally new?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're diving into today. We're looking at a text that says death is, get this, defeated.
Oh, wow.
And not symbolically, but like totally, utterly defeated.
I'm intrigued. I've got to hear this.
So picture this. It's a few days after the crucifixion of Jesus. His followers, they're devastated, completely lost in grief. The world just feels like heavy with despair.
Right, I can imagine.
And then, boom, something unbelievable happens. It says the stone is rolled away from the tomb, but not by like anyone there.
Okay.
And there's this feeling, this shift. It's like the air itself is buzzing with this new kind of energy.
So how does the text actually describe this resurrection?
Well, it's more than just like, oh, he's back, you know?
Right.
It's described as this huge, powerful experience, this totally unexpected thing breaking through. Like imagine the weight of grief suddenly lifting, replaced by, I don't even know, pure awe, I guess.
Yeah. So it's not just some dude waking up from a really long nap. It sounds like this was different.
Totally. Completely different. The text says this wasn't just about Jesus coming back. It was a turning point for everyone.
Yeah.
It's saying death, well, it doesn't have a last word anymore. And that this whole eternal life thing, it's suddenly a real possibility.
Wow. That's a huge claim. So this one event, this resurrection, it challenges like everything we think we know about death.
That's exactly it. It's like, boom, everything we thought we knew flipped on its head. And that's where this whole idea of Satan comes in.
Okay, how so?
The text kind of hints at this, like cosmic showdown happening alongside the resurrection.
Interesting. Well, traditionally, right, Satan's the ultimate bad guy. Temptation, lies, death. He's behind it all, the one in control.
So he's like the big bad villain of the story.
Exactly. But the resurrection, it changes everything. It's not just a personal victory for Jesus. It's like this massive win against everything Satan represents. Death, his like main weapon. It's not an ending anymore. Now it's a path to something bigger.
Wow, a real cosmic power move. But there's also this whole new covenant thing in the text, right? What's that all about? What does that even mean for people like back then and us now?
That's a great question. This new covenant, it's about how we relate to God. It's not about fear and rules anymore. It's about a relationship built on grace and love. It's a total game changer.
So less about what you do or don't do and more about love and forgiveness.
Exactly. It's a total shift in perspective, a whole new way of seeing things.
Wow, okay. And to really solidify this whole thing, the text says that after the resurrection, Jesus appeared to his followers.
Right. And we're not just talking about quick glimpses here. These were real, tangible encounters.
Wow.
Imagine that, seeing this happen with your own eyes, your grief, your doubt, everything just transforming into this incredible joy. The text describes it as the dawn of a new era.
Dawn of a new era. That's a powerful image. So what exactly changed? Like, what did this new era look like?
Well, this event, it sparked a whole new religion, Christianity, which, by the way, challenged the heck out of the powers that be at the time.
Right.
But it was more than that, you know? This event, this resurrection, it offered hope, a chance at redemption, and people connected with that in a huge way.
But even with this ultimate victory, how do we make sense of all the messed up stuff still happening in the world? You know, bad things still happen to good people.
That's a really important point, and the text acknowledges that it doesn't shy away from the reality of evil or the fact that we face temptation in this life. It's not like, poof, everything's perfect now.
So it's not an instant fix like flipping a switch.
Not at all. But this resurrection, it's like it gives us a new way to see those struggles, those dark times. It reminds us that even when things are tough, hope's still there.
So we're still fighting our own battles, even if the big one's already been won.
In a way, yeah. But the resurrection, it reminds us that we don't have to fight alone. It reminds us that even in our darkest moments, there's always hope. And honestly, I think it's in those tough times when our faith is tested the most that we discover how strong we really are.
Wow, that's powerful. So the resurrection, it's this turning point, a new agreement, a promise of hope that has echoed through history.
Yeah.
This deep dive has really made me think about, death and what it means to live a life that matters. If this victory over death is real, if hope and love are stronger than fear and despair, how do we tap into that? How do we let those truths shape our lives? It's something to think about.
Okay, so ready to dive into a real head scratcher? We're talking Jesus and Satan.
Oh yeah, those two.
Yeah.
Always good for a conversation.
Right. But, and here's the thing, we're not doing the typical Sunday school routine, good versus evil, all that.
Right.
We're going deeper,
Right.
Way deeper. We're talking about the why, the motivations. What would make anyone, choose the path these figures did?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because on the surface, well, it seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
But when you really dig in,
Exactly. It gets complicated. Like, take Jesus. Right. I mean, the guy could literally walk on water, heal the sick just by, like, touching them.
talk about a skill set.
Seriously. But then he chooses a path that leads to, well, suffering on a level most of us can't even imagine. What kind of love would lead someone to that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we throw around that word love, but the kind of love we're talking about here, it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost like it goes beyond human comprehension.
Right. It's like on a whole other level. And that's what makes it so compelling, because we
Yeah.
see these figures, these stories, and we have to ask ourselves, what does it really mean? What does it say about our own capacity for love, for sacrifice?
And don't forget, it wasn't just some abstract love. This was about action, about bridging this immense gap between, well, humanity and the divine.
And that's where Gethsemane comes in, right? That
Yeah.
moment when the weight of what he's about to face really hits him. You can practically feel the agony, the doubt, the sheer terror of what he's about to endure.
Oh, absolutely. Gethsemane, it's like this raw, unfiltered glimpse into the reality of Jesus' sacrifice. And I think that's what often gets lost. It's not just about accepting death. It's about taking on the weight of every single sin, every heartbreak, every ounce of darkness humanity has ever known, and saying, okay, I'll carry this.
It's heavy stuff, man. Really heavy stuff. And then there's the resurrection, which, let's be honest, kind of flips the whole script.
Right. Talk about a plot twist.
Seriously. It's not just about, surviving something awful. It's about this total transformation, taking the most brutal form of defeat and turning it into, I don't know, the ultimate victory. Makes you wonder if it was all like part of the plan from the beginning.
Always playing 4D chess, that one.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, but hold on, because we got to talk about the other side of the coin here.
Time for the flip side.
Yep, right, Satan. Talk about ambition. Right, this is being driven by pride, this hunger for power. And let's just say, when he finally makes his big move, it really shakes things up.
See, and that's what I find so fascinating about Satan. You have the classic interpretation, right? The whole rebellion against God, the whole good versus evil thing. But what if it's more than that? What if there's this underlying pain, this resentment, this feeling of being, I don't know, wronged somehow? It adds a whole other layer to the story, doesn't it?
Totally. And it makes his choices, his motivations, a lot more, I don't know, human. Like, we've all felt that sting of betrayal, that desire for revenge. Maybe not on a cosmic level, but still.
Relatable in a way.
Right, exactly. But here's the crazy part. In trying to, totally dismantle everything, Satan actually sets the stage for Jesus's ultimate victory. It's like the ultimate irony.
The ultimate backfire, you could say. And that's the tragedy of it, isn't it? Locked in this endless cycle of rebellion, chasing a victory he can never truly achieve.
And it's that pride, that same ambition that fueled his rebellion, that becomes his own personal prison.
Pretty heavy stuff to unpack, even for beings of, cosmic importance.
No kidding. But that's why we're here, right? To dive into the deep end and see what we find.
Exactly. Sometimes the most profound truths are hidden in the most unexpected places.
It's like we're looking at these two figures, Jesus and Satan, and they're like, I don't know, these cosmic representations of the struggles we all face.
Totally. It's like this battle between selflessness and, well, let's call it what it is, selfishness, playing out on this grand cosmic scale.
Right. And it makes you think, what impact do those choices have? Not just for them, but for, humanity as a whole.
Well, that's the thing about Jesus, right? He embodies this idea of redemption, but not just in the, religious sense. It's this universal concept.
Okay.
It's like we all mess up, right? We all make choices we regret, hurt people, fall short. But redemption, that's about the possibility of transformation, of rising above those mistakes and becoming, well, better.
So it's not just about being forgiven, it's about actually changing, growing.
Exactly. And that's powerful stuff, because it means that no matter how dark things get, there's always hope for something better. And that even our darkest moments can be redeemed by, well, love, this force that's more powerful than anything else.
Wow, I never thought about it like that.
And then you have Satan, and his story, well, it's a cautionary tale if I ever heard one. Because he represents what happens when we let those darker impulses, that pride, that resentment, take control.
It's like he gets so caught up in his own ambition, his own sense of being wronged, that he loses sight of everything else.
And the irony is, in trying to tear everything down, he actually creates the conditions for Jesus' message of love and redemption to spread even further.
That's talk about an epic own goal.
Right. But it just goes to show you, the choices we make, they have these ripple effects. And sometimes the things we do with the intention of causing harm, well, they can actually lead to unexpected outcomes.
It's like that whole butterfly effect thing.
Exactly. You just never know. But what really gets me is that even though we're talking about these beings with cosmic power, their struggles feel oddly familiar. Like we've all felt that pull between right and wrong, that temptation to choose the easier path, even when we know it's not the best one.
Oh, tell me about it.
The weight of responsibility, the fear of failure, the sting of betrayal, those are universal experiences. And they can either crush us or, well, they can be the catalyst for incredible growth.
It's like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And that's where the parallel of Jesus becomes even more powerful, I think. Because remember, he wasn't immune to those feelings. He felt the full weight of everything he was about to endure.
Yeah, so many, right.
Exactly. But instead of giving in to fear or despair, he chose love. He chose to carry on even when it was excruciatingly difficult.
It's a good reminder that, even when we feel like we're carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders, we still have a choice. We can choose to be better, to rise above those darker impulses.
Absolutely. And that's what's so amazing about the whole thing, right? Because it's not like these are just stories, these figures. Jesus, Satan.
Right. Like they're more than just characters in a book.
Way more. It's like they represent these fundamental forces, these choices that we all grapple with.
Like this kind of blueprint for humanity, but we get to decide how we use it.
100%. And every time we hit one of those crossroads in life, those moments where it's like, easy way or the right way, it's worth asking. Okay, what's guiding this decision? Is it love, compassion, or am I letting those other voices, the fear, the pride, the bitterness, take the wheel?
Because let's be real, if a being as powerful as Satan can get stuck in that cycle of, well, basically making the same mistakes over and over.
I guess you think, right? Like, what does that mean for us? What's the legacy we're building with the choices we're making day in and day out?
It's a lot, but it's also kind of hopeful. Like if we can tap into that other side, that capacity for love, for forgiveness, even when it's hard.
Maybe we can actually change things, shift the direction, create a better ending to this story.
Maybe that's the whole point, right? That we have that power, that choice.
Yeah.
And that's something worth fighting for.
Now you're getting it. It's not about being perfect. It's about striving, always striving, to be a little bit better than we were yesterday.
Man, so much to think about. This has been quite the deep dive, huh? Thanks for coming along for the ride.
Anytime, my friend, anytime. Until next time, keep asking the tough questions. And remember, even the smallest choices can make a world of difference.
And that's a wrap on another deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.